and aligning climate finance with biodiversity to achieve the broad sustainable development goals. I believe you can all hear me. Welcome to you all. We have quite a number of individuals had registered. I think we have about 22 now, but I think we should start others to join so that we don't have to waste so much time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. To provide a context, we are all too familiar with it atwined global crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss. And on account of this, the United Nations Climate Change Conference and the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity came up with two landmark agreements: the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework. As we embark on a whole of government, whole of society approach for implementing the Global Biodiversity Framework, like the Paris Agreement, the critical question that stands out today is how countries, or how can countries simultaneously achieve the goals of these two landmark agreements? We're all too familiar with this. Stakeholders have continued to underline the necessity of looking for climate solutions that tackle the two crises. Discussion at COP27 on climate change and COP15 on biological diversity demonstrated the need for synergies between the two, the biodiversity and climate agendas. For instance, part 6 of the GBF, Global Biodiversity Framework, highlights the need to promote coherence and complementarity and cooperation between the Convention on Biological Diversity and that relevant multilateral agreements and international institutions, respecting their mandates and create opportunities for cooperation and partnerships among the diverse actors to enhance implementation of the framework. Ladies and gentlemen, this end, for us, it has become necessary to explore how synergies could be built between climate and biodiversity strategies at the national or domestic level, with a view to achieving the goal targets of the two conventions. This is even more so since climate change is one of the key drivers of biodiversity loss. Biodiversity loss, per se, aggravates the challenges of climate change. For us here in Africa, whose vulnerability and resilience challenges are well known. Understanding the interconnections between biodiversity and climate change, and indeed exploring the potential to foster synergies in implementing the national strategies have become quite relevant. And indeed, given the current emphasis on nature-based solutions and the importance of protecting and restoring nature to address climate change, overlap measures are inevitable, whether in the NDC or in the national adaptation plans or could be the national biodiversity strategy and national action plans. They are likely to be overlaps. Hence, the need to give consideration to these two landmark conventions and promote coherence between climate actions and biodiversity protection strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, this forms the thrust of the series of webinars and workshops and trainings with a particular focus on multi-coherence between these two landmark conventions. Ladies and gentlemen, just to let you know that on June 14, the maiden edition of the webinar was held on the subject, the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework, Nexus, promoting coherence between climate action and biodiversity strategies. Focused on businesses. In fact, that webinar assisted in calling business attention on how they can identify or be in a position to see the convergence between the various instruments for managing climate change and biodiversity loss. Of course, it also called attention to the commonalities and differences between the two. Furthermore, we were able to strengthen our understanding of African businesses as they try as much as possible to understand the interconnections between biodiversity and climate change from that business perspective. This is the second webinar in the series, and it's titled The Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework, Nexus, Aligning Climate Finance with Biodiversity to Achieve the Broader Sustainable Development Goals Agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, just to emphasize, both conventions require greening finance, which of course needs a systematic shift in the global financial system from all sources. As the financial systems and economy must follow pathways to become climate neutral, nature positive, resilient, and less polluting. Some of the critical questions regarding this include the following. One, what integrated approach can be taken to deliver climate and biodiversity goals across the financial sector within or in support of the broader sustainable development goal? What is required to elevate the current levels of biodiversity finance and ensure a mechanism for valuing and investing in biodiversity to scale? Ladies and gentlemen, we also want to ask this question. What can help the financial sector to identify and indeed incorporate biodiversity impacts, dependencies, and risk in their business models and investment support? How can the financial sector indeed continually be motivated to drive business with a view to achieving a nature or support a nature positive economy? Ladies and gentlemen, all these questions and many more shall be given responses in the course of this webinar titled Paris Agreement and Global Biodiversity Framework, Nexus, Aligning Climate Finance with Biodiversity to Achieve the Broader Sustainable Development Goals. We have eminent experts who have indeed agreed to provide insights regarding this very beautiful topic. Ladies and gentlemen, we encourage you to benefit maximally as you remain quiet. Please give your undivided attention in the course of the videos, presentations, or discussions that are coming in shortly. Kindly mute the system, your system, so that we will have no distraction at all. Recall as emphasis the session promises to be quite illuminating. You want to pay that rapt attention. And so we encourage you to send your contribution if you have one. Your questions, your commendations, and indeed remarks to the chat box at the base of your system. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Eugene Itwa. I'm the CEO of Natural Eco Capital and the regional coordinator of West Africa Capitals Hub. We have other experts, like I said, indeed, that will be speaking. I'm only a moderator of this very session. To do the opening remarks, we have Dr. Joseph Onoja, who is our partner in this program and indeed in the series of webinars that we have outlined. He is the Director General, Nigeria Conservation Foundation. He's been at the forefront of driving all of these issues that we're talking about. Dr. Onoja, please, we are all ears waiting to hear you do the opening remarks. Dr. Onoja, can you hear us? I know he was traveling and he had said that hopefully he would have arrived before we start. I hope there are no hitches there. Mr. Uche, are you there? Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Or can any person hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Dr. Itwa. Good afternoon.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
I can hear you, Dr. Itwa. Well done.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Uche is the Executive Director, Nigeria Conservation Foundation. Are you there? Okay. Hopefully, Dr. Onoja will join us as we move along. I would like to call on our very first speaker, who says so much about this beautiful topic from that broader perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, he is the UNDP's SDG Impact Standard Lead. He is the Assurance Framework Lead as emphasis for the UNDP SDG Impact Standards. And he is an ambassador for the Capitals Coalition. Just to let you know, Capitals Coalition, of which we have the West Africa Capitals Hub, is a global collaboration to integrate sustainability into business decision making. He has been at the forefront, working on the interface between financial and sustainability accounting. He originally qualified as a chartered accountant. And he spent some time the finance director for Tanzania Railways. Ladies and gentlemen, he is one of the founders, and then indeed he was the CEO of Social Value International, SVI, and represents SVI on ISO technical committees, including chairing the project team for ISO 37005. Some few weeks ago, this erudite scholar and indeed practitioner was training some of us under SDG Impact Standard training course in Cape Town. And this was precisely July 10 to 12, 2023. So, he is my lecturer. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to welcome Jeremy Nichols, the lead for the UNDP's SDG Impact Standard. When we were talking, we talked about how we can align climate finance with biodiversity towards achieving the broader sustainable development goals. And indeed, how do we focus this on the African continent? Ladies and gentlemen, let's listen to Jeremy.
Have you finished, Eugene?
Listening to you now, we are all ears waiting to hear you.
You've taken longer to introduce me than I'm going to talk for. So that's very embarrassing.
No, just before you start, just to let you know, please, you can take a few minutes more. All of you can take a few minutes more. We have one of the speakers that just reached out that she will not be available because of change in her program. We'll talk about that later. But please just go ahead and take a few minutes more. It's all yours.
Well, maybe we'll leave that for questions. We'll see how we go. Are you in charge of moving the slides forward? Or is somebody else doing it?
Yeah,
I am.
Are you the one showing this?
Thank
Yes,
you.
I am. the
Okay,
one.
please.
I will shout next slide as we go, and then we'll go. So it's a real pleasure to be with you. Well, I'm not obviously with you. I'm actually talking to you from somewhere in the middle of England. I'm actually not quite sure where I am at the moment, but pretty much in the middle. And I suppose, Eugene,
And I know you're in the car.
I'm in a car, yeah. Full transparency.
Thank you.
When I was finance director of Tanzania Railways, it was about 30 years ago. So it gives you a clue as to how long I've been involved in this challenge. And I suppose, every day we look at the figures, we look at the statistics, we see the images on our TVs, and somehow I certainly, and I hope you do too, remain optimistic that the challenges we face are surmountable and well within our very human skills and creativity. But nonetheless, that's not to underestimate the scale of the challenge we face. So I'm going to go a little bit broad, I suppose, before we get into the specifics and talk about SDGs a little bit more generally, and specifically the work that we've been doing on SDG impact standards. So next slide, please. I guess, we've flagged this up as climate and biodiversity, but we know that you cannot separate these issues out, and we are facing levels of inequality globally that, it's probably difficult to think we've ever seen them historically, with the level of wealth distribution and the historical influences that have led to that. And our challenge is to try and do all these things at once. So I never want to forget that the consequences of climate change and the consequences of the drop in biodiversity are felt by the people with least power, and they drive inequality to ever further depths and increasingly exclude people. Next slide, please. And you'll know the environment issues we face, but I wondered that in the context really of the implications for wider inequality, because the SDGs obviously cover all these issues. Next slide, please. And I'm not being heard, Eugene. So some people can hear me because you're moving the slides, but other people are saying they can't on the chat.
I can hear you.
Yes, but we've had
I
a couple.
can hear you loud.
Yeah, we've had a couple of comments
Eli, can you hear him?
that people can't hear.
Hear him, rather?
Yep.
Eli, can you hear him?
Some can. George
I
can.
think so many persons can.
Again,
Please, if you cannot hear him, just rejoin, log out and rejoin.
yeah. Okay. So the problem is that I think that to date we have largely been taking a sticking plaster approach to the problem. It's very hard for us to really grapple with the scale of change we need, and we tend to go along doing things that we think, oh, we'll fix that, we'll cover over the cracks, and the problem will go away. But of course, we know that it's not going away; it's getting worse. And I think the time has come when we're increasingly aware that the things we need to do are more radical than we have previously been considering if we are seriously going to address this problem. Next slide, please. And the context for this, given the SDGs, I just wanted to give you some data behind this. This is an analysis of blended finance deals. So these blended finance deals are a mix of public and private money. It's a global analysis. it's probably not entirely complete, but it was going to be reflective of the wider picture. So these are investment deals where there has been some grant money coming from the public sector. And when we think about investing in the SDGs, we kind of, I think, assume that the money is strangely being distributed equally across the SDGs. And to give you a sense of then the first of our challenges, which is getting money to the right place and getting more money to the right place, you can see here the extraordinary bias that we have across the SDGs. So no one's very interested in peace and justice or quality education. And look at those, life on land and life below water, the primary drivers of biodiversity, right at the bottom of the list of where the investments are going. Whereas at the top, you see the partnerships for the goals, industry, decent work, affordable energy. Climate action's high up, you'll notice there, which is good because it is something I suspect that clearly is seen increasingly to affect all of us. Whereas those issues which do not affect all of us, like gender equality, for example, only affects half of us, although I would argue that it actually does affect all of us, it's just not recognized as such, is right down at the bottom. And so even within the SDGs, we do not have an equitable distribution of resources. And this is the ones with the public money. My guess would be that if you looked at the deals that are happening just on a private side and where those resources are going, you would reinforce this inequity even further. So our first challenge, of course, is to address this. And yet this is part of the work that we do within the SDG Impact team, which is around investment opportunities. And we have been working in a number of countries to create investor maps, which identify those areas of potential investment which are more aligned with the SDGs. They're not specific down to the level of an enterprise, but they're broad brush, but they're the kind of scene setter for people that want to then try and ensure that both a national policy for the national financing facility, down to the private sector deals that have been made, all the supports coming for the development banks, all the support for local stock exchange is all starting to recognize the need to target and prioritize within the SDGs. The next bit then, so next slide, please, is, and next slide, we all know those, is the fact that we need to start thinking about making sure that when the money gets there, it is actually contributing to the SDGs. And this is the reason why we have been creating these standards, partly because you will probably have noticed that there is an increasing tendency to see organizations report on the fact that they have made a contribution to SDG 3 or SDG 8 or whatever SDG it is, in a very selective way, where we're neither sure that the contribution has been made, we are not sure what the effect was on the other SDGs, it may have been negative, but we suspect that the level of contribution and the rate at which that contribution is made is lower than both it could be and needs to be if we are to achieve those goals. And just to remind ourselves, those goals are now 7 years away, and the latest report suggests that a number of them are moving in the wrong direction, not in the right direction. I mean, the recent report came out yesterday around genders, definitely moving in the wrong way. So all is not well, and we need, again, to ramp it up. And so the standards, you'll see the language there, talk about a transformational shift in mindset and decision-making. And it's the language we all use, we talk about these kind of things, and then we pass over it. And I can't really overemphasize the implications and importance of that transformation. And I think the organizations that we've been working with, they come into our standards with a kind of, oh, this is about the SDGs, we know about those, that's all fine. And then as they work through them, they realize that actually what we're talking about is a change management program within organizations to significantly change the way the organization thinks about these issues, aligning its resilience and competitiveness alongside the needs for sustainability and the opportunities that can arise from that way of thinking. Next slide, please. So we have four standards we've been developing. They are one for enterprises, one for private equity funds, one for bonds, and one we have done jointly with OECD for the DAX, for DFI finance. And so that is the kind of suite of standards. They are all free to use, and I'm sure after today, Eugene, we can send the documents or at least send the link around to everybody who's attended. And I recommend you kind of dig in and have a look. They are management standards, so they're not the same as all the other things that are happening around GRI or SASB or ISSB or all those other things that are happening where organizations are now increasingly thinking about or being required to report on their sustainability impacts. These standards are about, well, the problem actually is that we're not making decisions fast enough within organizations. And what we need to do is sort that out, the decision making. And if we get that right, then the level of performance being reported will go up as a matter of course. So next slide, please. Alongside, well, let me go back. Sorry, can we just go back one, and I'll stick with those standards for a second. We're really focusing here on decisions. And now I don't know about you, but my experience has been that when you ask an organization to tell you what decisions has it made differently over the last year because of sustainability or informed by an organization's contribution to sustainability, which may be a negative set of negative impacts as much as positive impacts, then the best you tend to get is a couple of anecdotes or stories about one or two things that may have happened. And when we reflect that during that year, organizations will have been making financially driven decisions at a much higher rate. They're making decisions every day in their hundreds, which are aimed around the issues of ensuring that there's a financial return. The fact that we can only reflect on a couple of stories about where decisions have been made which consider the impacts gives you a sense of the scale of the transformation that's needed, because we need all those decisions to have the sustainability consequences embedded within them. And these standards are about decision making. They have best practice around what we might think of as being measuring impact. But to be quite honest, we believe that most organizations have data already and can get insights from that data, which will help them make better decisions and create better products and have more resilient services today. And by thinking about how they can use that information in a forward-looking way, we will then collect more information because it's useful. At the moment, so much of the discussion is about go away and measure your impact and then think about using it, whereas our approach is much more, whatever you're doing, let's start making decisions now and then let's get better. And recognizing, of course, that if we increase the rate at which we make these decisions, there will be risks that we might make the wrong choices, because decisions are implicitly the choice between doing something in one way or doing something in another way. And whenever we do something in one way, there are pros and cons to doing it. There will be some positive consequences for people, and there are likely going to be some negative consequences for some other people. So again, we're saying we need to start understanding those trade-offs. We need people to be transparent about them. We need people to think about what it is when they have a positive consequence, but there's also something negative. Is the negative acceptable? Were the people involved in recognizing it? What is being done to mitigate it? Is there any sense of compensation being made? And what's the speed at which these issues are going to be addressed? So it's these kind of things that start to sink through. And as a director of a company been faced with these decisions, it's quite hard when you suddenly realize that you're sitting there making decisions with negative consequences, and you have to reflect on who gave you the right to do that. And the standards are about driving that level of accountability into our decision making and trying to do it as fast as possible, but recognizing we all start somewhere. And when you go online and look at the website, there is a whole suite of information to support these in terms of the standards, guidance, training. But importantly, there's also a simple Excel-based self-assessment tool you can work through and see where you're up to now in your own opinion. And it allows you to prioritize where you would go next. You know, what should we do next? What's easy and what's most useful for our businesses in order to improve their competitiveness and resilience. And I can't overemphasize the focus that we have on the opportunities that arise from these challenges. Yes, the world is a challenge, but yes, that does also provide opportunities for organizations to think about either revising strategy or business models or products and services in order to be fit for the needs of a sustainable well-being economy, if you want. So next slide. So alongside our enthusiasm to get something out which is aimed at decision making, not reporting, and to encourage people to move away from the claims around we contributed to this SDG or that, is that growing international concern about greenwashing. And we know what happens with greenwashing. It doesn't actually wash. I'm always a bit surprised why we use the word washing, because what's happening is the top bit's getting washed maybe, but the bit underneath is not. Next slide, please. And you will have also now started to hear about impact washing, SDG washing, pink washing, blue washing. A rainbow of washing is going on at the moment. And so our concern was to do something about this. Next slide, please. And so my main role is to look like this dog and to develop a third-party assurance framework for organizations that want it, that think they have reached the point that they meet the requirements of those standards and want to make a public claim that they do. And that public claim would be an organization that has the strategy, the management, the transparency, and the governance to be optimizing its contribution to sustainability and the SDGs. I think we even use the word maximizing because we recognize the need to really increase the rate at which we do these things. Now, if you think you're doing that and make the claim, then we will have somebody else come along and provide an assurance service, much like you would around your audit, but they're going to be looking at the internal systems that you have in place in relation to our standards. And they will be looking like this dog when they have a skeptical perspective of the claim that you make, in order to ensure, because these assurance providers that we're training up are acting in the end through the UNDP in the interests of people's human rights and the impacts that they experience. And so whilst it may be the organization paying for that assurance if they wish it and they can use it and they can make those claims, it's being done actually in the interest of people's human rights and the impacts that they experience. And so you get that skeptical look. And there has been a lot of debate around this, but it always strikes me as strange that we live in a world where financial audit has been a fundamental building block to the leverage of resources into public markets and through stock exchanges, where we simply wouldn't get the level of private investment in businesses if we did not have a financial audit. And we recognize that. And yet we still argue about whether it is appropriate to have the audit of impact claims or things like the SDG impact standards, even though they are there to protect the rights of people who have less power and less agency than the investors for whom we all take that for granted. Next slide, please. Hopefully there's a next slide somewhere in the system. So that's it, really. I do think that if we start to get this right, if we start to embed these things, then these are voluntary at the moment, but I think there's slight movements towards recognizing that performance reporting on impact needs to be part of the regulations. Then I do believe we can turn the kind of creativity, the imagination, the entrepreneurial spirit that we all have towards well-being, as opposed to simply towards financial returns. Then humanity has all the skills it needs to crack this, reduce inequality, protect biodiversity, regenerate our natural ecosystems, and reverse the changes that are happening to climate. It is possible. And so please, if you want to know more, then we'll circulate the information, and please get in touch with me. And thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeremy, for those insightful presentation. For me, it's quite illuminating, like I mentioned earlier, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you that just joined, what we have been listening to is a topic on, or the question, he was trying to answer the question on how we can align climate finance with biodiversity to achieving broader sustainable development goals. Ladies and gentlemen, among the things he just talked about is that even among the SDGs, we do not have equitable distribution of the financial resources that need to be addressed. For instance, down at the bottom, He even talked about those that relate to what the subject of the day: climate action and biodiversity. So I think all that need to be addressed, as much as he recognized that so much money is going to partnership, that need to be addressed. And for organizations to really tell it out very well on what they are doing positively, they also need to take on that SDG impact standard. And recall he mentioned that there is even a version that we can access online and Excel for a simple evaluation. Please, you try and see how you assess that. And indeed, he has assured us that there are, you remember he mentioned some of the publications that have been made, that will be shared. We will get from him and share that. Again, rather than just saying optimizing, he mentioned that we should maximize the impact rating. How will it boost your performance, your ranking among your peers? We want to avoid pink washing. We want to avoid blue washing. Just name it, whatever code that we want to use to qualify the washing. If we are able to use the standard that are being brought out, I think you might be in position to support your course very well. And of course, we'll be in position to turn this around, working together. Thank you very much for that very brilliant presentation. One of the things that we'll love to talk about is elevating the current levels of biodiversity finance and an institutional mechanism for valuing and investing in biodiversity to scale. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker has a strong expertise on the GBF, climate, and biodiversity finance. Interestingly, she supported the interface, dialogue, finance, and biodiversity work. That work tries to align and scale private and public financial flows for nature. The white paper that came out of it, she was the lead author. She is currently the lead analyst on tracking financial flows at the national level in line with the goals outlined in the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework. Eli Morel, or Ellie Morel, you permit me to choose one.
Thank you, Eugene.
Is the green finance and nature-based solution consultant and Nature Squared. Nature Squared is based in Amsterdam. Interestingly, I've been to the office. The office is opposite the central station in Amsterdam. She will be helping us to understand how to elevate the current levels of biodiversity finance and institutional mechanism for valuing and investing in biodiversity to scale. For instance, in Africa, as we look at achieving the broader sustainable development goal. And I think the entire audience is waiting to hear you.
Thank you, Eugene, and I'm very happy to be here. I will follow Jeremy's lead and also just say next slide, please, when moving on. So I'm Eli. I work on different financial mechanisms for biodiversity and biodiversity-based business cases and nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. So a lot of our work that we've done for what Eugene mentioned, the interface dialogue for finance and biodiversity, has been working with different governments in the leading up to the new global biodiversity framework being agreed back in 2022 to see what the needs are for biodiversity in terms of finance overall, but also in terms of institutional mechanisms to enable that finance to be realized at scale. So what we see is currently there's only about 120 to 155 billion dollars invested annually in biodiversity directly, but that the real need in order to reverse nature loss and to actually make a net positive impact on biodiversity is at least $700 billion a year. On top of that massive lack of financing, there's also a lot of government-led support that actually goes into harming nature. So a lot of institutional support, such as harmful subsidies for stuff like fossil fuels or extractive industries that really have a negative impact on nature itself. And that stands at between $500 and $800 billion every year. So what we've really seen is that while we need to green existing flows and to realign those harmful subsidies, we also need to increase investment and generate new funds, both privately and publicly. As Jeremy was saying, yeah, we see a lot of blended finance models with a lot of public finance already in there, but we really need to leverage more and more private finance and private investment to be able to create real change and to create scalable business models that can have a positive impact. Next slide, please. So what we see as a really important key first step, and that's something that, for example, Biofin is a great example of, and it's really helping with at the moment, is the need to assess at the national level the governance and the financial needs for improving investment outcomes and to going towards the international goals as well as those national biodiversity strategy and action plans and national biodiversity action plans, finance plans, sorry. So in order to identify those financial flows, there really needs to be an assessment, not just of financial ministries or of the environmental ministries and looking at where they're spending their money, but also every other sector possible. It is possible to analyze across the government. So look at every subsidy that goes through every sector that can even not directly impact nature, because only then can you get a real idea of how much money is going against nature and going against climate outcomes and how much is actually geared towards it. And it's a very little amount overall that goes towards making these positive impacts. So after making that assessment, it's really important to look at mainstreaming and aligning policies and budgets. And we really see that there's a call for mandating reporting and monitoring mechanisms, both for financial actors, but also for other sectors of the economy, so that businesses really learn how to value and integrate that value of biodiversity into their assessment of their own businesses and into their own financial statements. And beyond just looking and measuring and reporting, it's also important to develop new ways to increase positive finance for nature and positive impacts. So we see that there's lots of opportunities in creating taxes on harmful activities, creating subsidies that instead help people develop more sustainable business models. So instead of having subsidies for chemical fertilizers that cause a lot of problems in agriculture, instead creating subsidies for educational programs on sustainable and regenerative agriculture, so that farmers can actually be well trained in these new processes and new ways of farming. We also see that developing more market-based mechanisms, as has been done for climate, but also for biodiversity. That's a really essential step to make. So if it's possible to create bigger markets for ecological credits, and this has already been done a lot in South America, but to really kind of piggyback on what has been done with climate finance and with climate mechanisms to try and get the ball moving with biodiversity. And we see there's also big opportunities for alignment with climate and biodiversity in these market-based mechanism kind of instruments, because a lot of these projects that really focus on carbon sequestration and generating carbon credits, if they are aligned with biodiversity goals and needs, they can also be designed to increase biodiversity at the same time, thereby kind of contributing to both of the outcomes that we need. Next slide, please. And on the topic of increasing and scaling finance and investment in biodiversity, we see a big roadblock for increasing financing, private financing, is the de-risking of private investment. There's a lack of understanding in a lot of the private sector as to what the outcomes of these different projects are. A lot of the projects have very long lead time. You don't always know the outcomes, you don't always know the risks, you just know that there are many and that they can come up at any time. So in order to really make these investments more attractive, we need to develop more solutions and more prototypes, more pilots that really start to go into these risks and to find ways to reduce them as well. So one popular way we have found when we've worked with different industry actors is, of course, blended finance solutions, especially things like pooled funds and trust funds. These models really help reduce risk by either providing startup and catalytic capital or through funding the very risky stages of project development. And that's especially in the proof of concept stage, trying to get the pilot going, trying to show that there are any impacts in the first place and it can have a good impact. And then going from that small proof of concept model to being able to actually scale that business is where we need private sector investors to really step in. But it's really hard to encourage them to do that when there are so few proven concepts and there's so few models that have been successful on a large scale. We do see increasingly, though, funds that are being developed, blended finance funds, where we have a public actor acting as a guarantor of the finance provided or the loans provided. And this has been very successful in encouraging more and more private actors to invest in these kind of funds and these kind of projects. Next slide, please. So we see the biggest, most important element that comes up a lot when discussing financing biodiversity projects and nature-based solutions is the development of pipelines of bankable projects that are able to be scaled and to be replicated. This is a big issue because, one, there is just a general lack of project pipelines already available. There are a lot of investors with a lot of money that are looking where to put that money, but they want something that's proven to work. And they want something that they don't have to trial and error for a few years in the beginning before they're willing to fully scale it. So there are a lot of funds available, but there is a mismatch between the available projects and the wants and needs of investors and of commercial finance. We also see with a lot of business developers, they have great ideas and they have all these amazing new projects that are really aiming to create change for biodiversity and for climate, but they don't always know how to create a business model that is attractive to these big commercial investors. So there's also a bit of a misalignment on education on these kind of elements that they need to have as part of this business model in order to attract finance in the first place. So there are a lot of good solutions, but they need initial financing to help them develop the concept, to develop the full business model before it becomes properly attractive. And that's where these blended funds can really come in useful, because they can help finance that part before taking it to private investors. So in order to really make these business models attractive, like I was saying, they do need a lot more interest in the initial stages. But part of the reason why it is hard to scale these solutions is really to do with the complexity of biodiversity. As it's such a context-specific issue, you can develop business models that can be scaled, but it's harder to develop models that can be fully replicated. So of the few successful cases that we do see when we look at funds or business models that are quite specific, for example, for sustainable agriculture based on cacao or based on coffee production, what works in one part of the world doesn't work in another. And a lot of people want an easy fix, replicable solution that can go, you can just take it from one place and transplant to another. With biodiversity business cases, there is a really great potential for scaling them, but it needs to be done in a specific context, and it needs to be kind of implemented at a landscape scale that really takes into account all of the different stakeholders and all of the different potential risks that occur throughout the landscape. And we also see implementing something at a landscape scale can create more outcomes, more long-lasting positive outcomes as well, rather than just implementing small projects in different patches of a landscape that are very, very disconnected. And finally, we see a lot of potential for leveraging already existing climate solutions to help benefit biodiversity as well. And we think that integrating biodiversity considerations into climate projects or combining the two offers the biggest opportunities to maximize outcomes for both. So thank you. I think that's the last slide.
Thank you very much. Ella, thank you very much for that. Again, a very insightful presentation. We just got from you, helping us to understand how indeed we can accelerate the financing of various projects. And one of the challenges you had identified is that we seem to have a lot of money, but projects to support or to finance are really not there. I think I could put that from what you just said. Thank you very much. Again, for those of you that just joined, she had talked about how we can increase and scale investments. Those are part of the things she talked about. Without having to waste much time looking at this challenge, we would like to have another person to speak to some of these issues with regard to what is it that we have learned in all of this, in terms of how resources have been mobilized. Recall earlier, the first speaker, Jeremy, had talked about the low support when it comes to all of this in relation to the various SDGs, in terms of resources that have been mobilized. Now, we have the next speaker. Just to let you know, she's been in the field of sustainability for over 20 years. She has pioneered many notable sustainability-focused initiatives. Are you aware that she supported Nigeria and the African continent indeed in getting them on the global goal, on the global map for the financial sector? She was appointed to the Banking Technical Committee of the Global Sustainability Standard Board to develop global sustainability reporting standards for the banking sector. At the time, she was the only West African on the global team that developed the global principles for responsible banking, and the only African member of the S&P Global Sustainable Finance Scientific Council. Interestingly, in 2020, she led her organization to become the first sustainability certified commercial bank in Africa under the Sustainability Standard and Certification Initiative, championed by the European Organization for Sustainable Development. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to call on this multiple award winner, Omobolale Victor Laniyan, who is the head of sustainability in Access Cooperation. Access Bank is part of Access Cooperation, and so she's the head of sustainability. She will be helping us to understand what we have learned, all the learning curves that we can consider with regard to mobilizing resources to support climate action, support biodiversity, and indeed for us to be able to achieve the broader sustainable development goal. Once again, I have been Omobolale Olaniyan. We are waiting to hear.
Thank you very much, Dr. Itwa, and I hope you can hear me well. Good afternoon, everyone.
Except I will not see your video.
Yes, because the network is really erratic, and so I want at least my the audio to work well, and I apologize for that. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean, we've gathered today to discuss a topic of utmost importance, the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework, with a specific focus on aligning climate finance with biodiversity to achieve the broader Sustainable Development Goals agenda. You agree with me that in the wake of devastating natural disasters and extreme weather events, we've all witnessed the urgency of addressing climate change and preserving our precious environment and the biodiversity. African economies rely heavily on industries with significant environmental footprints, leading to environmental degradation and threat to biodiversity-rich ecosystems. For those of us that are in the financial sector, you find that quite a number of our clients as well, do business that also kind of impact the environment, and we seek to work hand in hand with them to see how to mitigate the various risks the process of the business engagement, bring the impact it has on the environment. So to overcome these challenges and deliver climate and biodiversity goals across various sectors, it's important that we take an integrated approach that prioritizes 1, sustainability, 2, innovation, and 3, collaboration. So, I always say that we have 17 sustainable development goals, but the truth is that there are actually 16 goals, because goal 17 speaks to how do we achieve goal 1 to 16. It speaks to partnership, it speaks to collaboration, which is very essential. And therefore, to move forward in the agenda, it's important that we hinge what we do on partnerships. The Paris Agreement, we all know, was adopted in December 2015 at the COP21, COP21. And it was a collective response to the urgent need to combat climate change and limit global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels, with efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Its objectives to enhance adaptation, mitigation, and finance for climate action are essential for safeguarding our planet and its biodiversity. The Paris Agreement in itself serves as a guiding framework for global climate action, which of course, that action needs funding, right? And as an organization, and I think as a financial sector, we're dedicated to incorporating its objectives into our strategies and our investments. So what we do is we align financing decisions with the goal of limiting global warming to safe levels. And as we do that as organizations, we are able to actively contribute to a low carbon and climate resilient future. With respect to the global biodiversity framework, we are aware that this is an international agreement that aims to address the alarming decline of biodiversity worldwide. And it holds tremendous significance in our pursuit of a nature-positive economy. Now, the intersection of the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework presents us with a unique opportunity to drive credible business action towards a sustainable future. So by incorporating climate and biodiversity considerations into our various corporate strategies, into our investing decisions, into the way we design our products and our services, any and every institution can channel resources towards climate resilient and biodiversity friendly projects. So initiatives, and I'll take an example from Access Holdings. So initiatives like green bonds, sustainable loan options, amongst others, exemplify how climate finance can support nature positive investment and contribute to the conservation of biodiversity rich ecosystems. I've mentioned the essence of collaboration earlier, and I will repeat it. Collaboration is at the heart of our efforts. And I think it should be at the heart of the efforts of every individual and organization. And we actively, on a continuous basis, seek partnerships with multilateral organizations, civil societies, and local communities to develop nature-based solutions that benefit both biodiversity and local economies. These collaborative initiatives will contribute not only to the conservation of biodiversity-rich ecosystems, but also to the achievement of our climate and sustainable development goals. Another important thing is transparency, accountability, and robust reporting. These are important requirements on biodiversity impact and dependencies, and will help ensure that stakeholders are empowered to make informed decisions that prioritize biodiversity conservation in their investments. As we address the biodiversity finance gap, we must explore opportunities to repurpose harmful subsidies and redirect them towards nature positive initiatives. By doing so, we are able to create an investment pool dedicated to financing projects that protect and restore ecosystems and species, thus advancing our biodiversity conservation efforts, while simultaneously supporting climate change goals. In the same vein, there has to be investment in research and development to quantify the economic value of ecosystem services, demonstrating the strategic importance of biodiversity finance as a long-term investment in our nation's prosperity and in the prosperity of the global community will help mobilize additional resources and funding. As leaders committed to driving positive change and sustainable development, we must embrace our role as responsible financial stewards, ensuring that our actions contribute to a thriving planet for present and future generations. And I'll round up by saying, together, let us seize this transformative moment and work towards a nature-positive economy that fosters harmony between human prosperity and the preservation of our precious biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mobolale Victor Lanyon, for that very brilliant, again, presentation. You've assisted us to understand what we can actually do in mobilizing resources, especially towards nature positive investments. And thank you very much. And one very brilliant point you mentioned just now is investment in research and development. We will discuss that further. Thank you very much. And interestingly, before COP15, I recall there was this body that was moving every stakeholder, especially businesses, and indeed, they moved over 400 business and finance institutions from about 52 countries to help government to understand why businesses, especially large corporates, should assess and disclose their risk, their impacts, their dependencies on nature. At the forefront was this very young lady. She was advocating whether she's the nature's, rather advocacy director of business for nature. Marley Pellison will be talking to us very shortly. And what will he be talking to us about? How you and I can move the financial sector to demonstrate that they are taking credible action, business action, in support of nature positive economy. And I recall Omobolale had talked about credible business action. And interestingly, how can we indeed, or what can we do to drive the financial sector for credible business action towards achieving a nature positive economy, especially again, in support of the broader sustainable development goals agenda. Mary Pellison will be waiting to hear you talk on this. Once again, she is the Business for Nature's Advocacy Director. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Eugene, for this very kind introduction and for calling me a young lady. So yes, I'm Maëlle Pellisson, I'm the Advocacy Director at Business for Nature. And so very interesting to hear all these experts on this topic. And I think I wanted to re-emphasize that one of the key achievements of the Global Biodiversity Framework was the inclusion of the commitment to align all financial flows to the mission and vision of the Global Biodiversity Framework. This has been included in Goal D, and that has the objective for 2050 to align all those financial flows with the vision to live in harmony with nature, but also more concretely and for a more recent target, on target 14 for 2030, that commits all governments that are signatories to the CBD to put in place the measures to ensure that all the relevant public and private activities, as well as fiscal and financial flows, are by 2030 aligned with the goals and the targets of the framework. And this is quite groundbreaking commitment in the nature agenda, and that really aligns with the objective of the Paris Agreement that has a similar article in Article 2.1 of aligning all financial flows with climate objective. And I just wanted to say that also this outcome has been achieved thanks to the massive mobilization at COP15 of the financial sectors, and notably through the Finance for Biodiversity pledge that brought together 140 financial institutions that were calling for this level of ambition. So now we are at the time where it's up to governments and to the financial sectors to really act on the implementation of these commitments. So we've heard a lot of the role and option there is for government, and I wanted to come back more on the role of financial institutions, because they really have a dual responsibility. First of all, they need to limit their own footprint on nature, but they also need to limit the footprint of the companies that they fund. And so therefore they have a real role in reducing the negative impact that they have directly or indirectly through their financing power, but also in mitigating the risks in their operation. And also, as Ellie was mentioning, supporting unlocking commercial opportunities. So we've been working, so Business for Nature is a global coalition. We have more than 85 partners everywhere in the world. And we've been working with our partners because now a lot of financial institutions are already very engaged, as I mentioned, on this topic, but also nature is still very new for a lot of business and in organizations. So they come to us saying, okay, what are the first steps? Where can we start? We're a bit confused with everything that we can do and everything that exists. So we've been working with all our partners to develop a series of guides that highlight priority actions that organizations can take to contribute to this objective. And one of these guides is specifically for the finance sector, and it highlights the actions that they can take to align their financial flow with the objective of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So those 12 guides will be launched in September at the New York Climate Week. But I'm really glad already to be able to present some of the main points with you today. It is still a work in progress. So when I go through this presentation, if you identify major gaps or elements that are not included, please feel free to reach out and make some suggestions. Are we still working on the details? And we'll be happy to reflect some inputs that you may have. So more specifically, this guide for the finance sector highlights 5 actions that financial institutions can take now to start acting. So the action 1 and 2 are for them to start getting ready for action. So the action 1 is building internal capacities to act on nature. So we're calling on financial institutions to work with their team to ensure that their team members have the skills in understanding, assessing, and addressing nature-related risks. So that means that we've heard there's a lot of a growing number of tools and guidance available. It can be a bit confusing, and financial institutions have the capacities to really understand those tools and guidance and to train their team so that they can put them in place. They can start using pilot projects through those guidance to start testing their internal policies to see how effective they are. And the suggestion is also to start working on quick wins. So looking at areas where the nature-related risks and opportunities are the greatest, and where they can achieve some wins with a limited time and costs to start the process. The second action that we recommend is to develop financing policies, strategies, and transition plan to favor nature. So they would be introducing ambitious strategies that tackle specifically the drivers of nature loss, such as deforestation or pollution. And that should also include some sector-specific or asset-specific policies where appropriate. And we really recommend as much as possible, and that's the whole context of this webinar, is to integrate those nature policies together with climate related policies or sustainability policies, so that people in the companies that know already how to work on climate can just integrate those nature policies together. So in parallel, what's really important for the accountability is, together with those policies, to establish monitoring and management reporting mechanisms to ensure that those policies are followed and across the whole organization, and also to create this accountability and ownership at the highest level. We recommend to assign clear responsibility at executive or at board level for meeting those goals and implementing those policies. So that was action 1 and 2. Action 3 and 4 are more focused on the implementation. So action 3 is to make sure, and Jeremy talked about that quite a lot, to making sure that they embed nature in risk management system. So for that, there's the need to create mechanism for assessing and disclosing nature impacts and dependencies of the business that they finance or that they provide financial services to. So that includes building processes for screening new financial relationships and regularly assessing the nature footprints of those relationships, and also to integrate this information in existing risk management processes and reporting system. Then linked to this reporting system, so the fourth action is to develop robust nature-related reporting system. We've heard about the requirements in the Global Biodiversity Framework to assess and disclose risks, impact, and dependencies for businesses. So we're really calling on financial institutions to work with existing framework, for example, with the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, TNFD, to design and to build reporting systems that cover all those impacts, dependencies, risks, and opportunities. And again, as much as possible, this needs to build on existing climate system to make it easier for everyone to implement. And finally, the last action, the action number 5, is to support and to engage. So probably the most important elements for financial institutions is to engage with the businesses that have high risk on nature or high impact on nature. So the objective here is to really starting to assess which one of those companies have the highest risk based on the reporting that I just mentioned, and to work hand in hand with this organization to help them make the right decision for nature. So that includes gathering more information, specifically location-specific data, to recalibrate and to mitigate the company-specific risks, and also work with those companies to explore nature-related investment opportunities. So that's kind of give a big overview of where to start and what's this nature positive journey for financial institutions. As I mentioned, we're still working on this guidance, so we welcome any views, suggestions on major gaps that might still be there. So please feel free to be in touch and share more information. But the main message that we want to give to financial institutions and to some extent to businesses in general is that there is a very clear way forward. Governments around the world have developed this roadmap. Now there is roadmap that are being translated for different sectors, and there is one for the financial sector. So they can take action now. Many sector-specific guidance and tools exist to accompany the financial sector in this journey. So basically, there's no justification at this stage for inaction, and there's no time to lose, so that we hope that everyone can collaborate and work together in this journey. As I said, all of this sector action will be released in September. So if you are interested in hearing more when they are being released, I'm going to put in the chat how to sign up to our newsletter, so you make sure that you also receive all those details when it's released in September. So I'll put in the chat now, so feel free to sign up. So thank you so much, Eugene.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mandy, for that, again, quite educative presentation, helping us to understand that look, even the financial sector have dual role in this. They need to deal with their own risk, just as they are dealing with the risk of those that they provide funding for, support for. Thank you very much. And so one other thing that you have mentioned is the financial institutions need to support and engage these institutions, these organizations, especially the bigger ones. Thank you very much. And those publications that are forthcoming, of course, we look forward to seeing them and learning from them as well. Whatever business for nature brings out, they are always very enlightening. And we thank you. You have been good enough. Our Capital Coalition has been on the focus on this with you. Thank you for this brilliant. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we will just use the floor for some few questions that are online. Earlier, we had stated that if you have questions, please insert them in the chat box here. And the comments you have, we suggested that you put them here as well. And we can see a whole lot of them. And one of the things we mentioned earlier is that, yes, with the kind permission of the presenters, we will share the slides that we have. Good enough, they are likely kindly going to give us the go ahead. But I'm not reading their minds, please. One of the things mentioned here is how can we lead the agenda for nature reinvestments, considering the fact that our nation just removed harmful subsidy of fossil fuel. I think particularly that question is tailored to or addressed to Omobolale. because I know it's Nigeria that just removed fuel subsidy. And so please, if let me just see how many of these I can read out, and then we take them one after the other. So she had talked about the person at Biodun and Deribigbe had asked the question, how can we lead the agenda for nature reinvestment? Consider the fact that our nation just removed harmful subsidy for fossil fuel. Let me see if I can see another one on here. Please kindly insert your question here, because you may not have the opportunity to speak. You are not likely to have opportunity to speak. Insert your question in the chat box. That is what we have said. So Idris, please just type your question here. We will not unmute you to speak, please. I'm searching for the questions. Maybe perhaps why I am searching for that. Normally, would you want to speak to that question I have been asked?
Hello, sir. I'm sorry. Please, can you repeat the question? I don't think I picked it. Sorry.
So the person is talking about reinvestment. Reinvestment. In the light of the removal of fuel subsidy, the person is talking about reinvestment. Let me read it again so that you can get the full picture of what the person is saying. How can we lead? Perhaps how can Access Cooperation, let me put it that way, lead the agenda for nature reinvestment in the light of the removal of fuel subsidy? Good enough, he qualified it and said harmful subsidy of fossil fuel. So I just hope you were able to hear me very well, and you picked some of the ideas. Just yeah.
Okay. Excuse me, sorry. Okay, so
maybe perhaps let me add this to it. Sorry, I've just seen another one. The person is saying that from her practical experience, are there financial institutions, particularly developing, willing to invest in such a research? If yes, is Access Bank doing it in Nigeria? That's Professor Ladipo Emmanuel that is asking that question.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Itwa.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. I will speak to the two questions briefly. So the first question is speaking to reinvestment and talking about the removal of fuel subsidy. I think that first of all, in terms of our agenda, right, and our plans as a country, in terms of our commitment to net zero by 2060, really, we need to start to look for opportunities to reinvest actually our resources in cleaner energy initiatives and sectors. And so when I mentioned collaboration, it's very critical because working in a partnership between private sector and government or public sector would help to, and of course, the established bodies, there are very many different bodies that have been established that are working on SDGs, that are working on there's the National Council on Climate Change. There are various bodies, right, or initiatives that exist. So it is really having a proper handshake amongst the various existing bodies, right? to identify, right, the opportunities. And there are many low-hanging fruits, right, that I think that the government can quickly pluck and deliver on. But again, I will just say reinvestment is the way, is what we should do, and that it will require public-private partnerships, also because of the skill sets that reside in the private sector, and the experience that is within private sector, coupled with the policy making power that exists within government. I think that there's a lot that can be done. But I would, on this platform, I would like to leave it at that. The second question speaks to research. Are we willing to invest in research? I think that organizations naturally rely on data, right? Without research, we can't take informed decisions. So on a natural note, organizations that are strategic, in the way they embrace the work that they do, would always, find a way, one way or the other, to support research work, right? And so, do we support research work? Yes, we do, on different fronts. But the thing is, I keep talking about collaborations. So again, rather than go the journey alone, we would rather be maybe a part of an organization or an association or a body or an initiative that is maybe pursuing research in an area, and then combined with other private sector organizations or other organizations that have similar interests. We then together support or finance research. On the issue of biodiversity research, or research on the conversations we are having today, we have not, so just to clarify on that, we have not funded any such research, because also, one, we don't have the request for it yet. Two, I'm sure you heard Dr. Itua say we will have a conversation right after. It is one of the things that in our conversations with Natural Eco Capital, we've been having conversations about, and I think that at some point we had some conversation with the NCF, because without that data, without that research, we can't take informed decision. But about collaboration on data, we already adopt that approach on different initiatives. So in terms of health sector, for instance, on the platform of the Private Sector Health Alliance of Nigeria, we partner with other, like-minded organizations to fund certain research that will give us access to data that would enable us take informed decisions. So again, is taking that same model and bringing it on board biodiversity and climate, and bridging the gaps that exist to help ensure that there is access to credible and reliable data. Credible and reliable data that we can use.
You've answered the question. Thank you very much. We certainly appreciate your response. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a minute left for this session. You kindly permit us to extend it by 5 minutes. There are 2 questions. And then after the 2 questions, we'll have the DG of NCF do the closing remark for this very session. Just to let you know, if you are interested in joining the Capital Coalition, a link would have been shared. I believe Rotim must have shared the link here. Please kindly join. Even NCF is also membership. You can also join. We encourage you to join this. You will have access to all the pool of this information that have been, of literature that have been talked about. In just 1 minute, the questions that have not been answered, there are two critical ones here. We have the one from Professor Joseph Quere, who have talked about the skills, the state of knowledge, skill, capacity in government, ministry, NGOs, private sector, universities, and so on and so forth. These are emerging issues. And I want to say, for instance, Mali had talked about, even Jeremy talked about it. Some of these issues, we need to learn more about it. And so in terms of practice, we need to learn more about all of them at the various levels. The SDG standard, impact standard that he talked about earlier, Jeremy, I don't know if you are still there. Would you, in 1 minute, just speak to this as to the state of knowledge regarding this? And then there's still another question. I say, how can a sense of urgency be created within the government cycle? We're talking about the private sector, financial institutions, especially today. When we get to the private sector, rather the government agencies, later or not in this webinar, we have another one coming up. Which government agency is this climate change bodies associated with? Do we envisage another question? And that was from Dr. Bona. And then Mr. Muyiwadele of UNDP is also asking, do we envisage any methodological challenges with the proposed harmonization? And what are the suggested pathways for promoting transformative, speedy decision-making within organizations with unusually strong organizational culture, where finance and profit is the king? One other question says, and this is specifically to Eli, how can climate finance directly improve the life of local communities, and particularly the farmers and herders? As agriculture is one of the major contributors to climate change. Secondly, there is need for intensive education and creation awareness for the entire SDGs. I guess he wanted to say SDG, although he mentioned MDGs, SDGs, as a number of contributors live in rural areas that have no access to education, less of climate change that needs to be engaged. I'm not getting that right. But of course, Idris, thank you very much for that question. And then I think those are a few of the questions I can see. And after Jeremy, are you still there? Because I know he will be joining. Ellen, would you want to speak for just very brief? It doesn't have to be an extended one, just very brief, so that we keep within the 5 minutes that we just talked about.
Yes, sure. I was just about to actually write a message to Idris saying that I can share my email address, and if you share your question with me, I can give a more in-depth answer. But in terms of climate and biodiversity finance, we actually are working with a lot of organizations on a platform called Greenerland, and it's a website where we receive investment to create this educative tool that is available online. And it tells people in different landscapes how to restore their landscapes and also how to implement more sustainable agricultural practices. And the aim of this tool is to really, at the moment, you have it available in as many different languages as possible and make it also available offline. And I think that when you have investments in these kind of things, like mobile-enabled solutions and solutions that can really reach the furthest parts of the society that are more rural and don't have common internet access or always have the best educative materials available, that's one way in which finance can be used to really spread awareness of these things and to teach people how to transition, even if they're not at the forefront of it themselves.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, certainly we're going to engage more the relevant stakeholders. Like I said, last time we were the first webinar, we had talked about the business angle to the whole thing. And today we're looking at finance. We have another, the very next one, we will share the details with you. Just to let you know, in between, we will be supportive of capacity building for the relevant stakeholders. We will share with you when these things, the date for all of this, when the sessions we hold. Thank you very much. We want to appreciate all of you that joined, even at the late hour. I would like to call on the DG. Please, if your question was not responded to, if you still have any question in mind, insert it in the chat box. We will get the speaker and to respond to all of them, and then we will share with you. Thank you very much. I'd like to call on the DG of the Conservation, Nigeria Conservation Foundation, who is represented here by Mr. Uchenna Achunena, the Director, Business Development and Communication, Nigeria Conservation Foundation. Please, we would like to hear from you. Do the closing remark. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Itzra, for ably coordinating and moderating this very important session today, the second webinar series that NCF and Natural Equity Capital has put together. I bring greetings from the Director General of Nigerian Conservation Foundation, Dr. Joseph Onoja, who confirmed to be present at this webinar, but he had a delay in his flight that made it impossible for him to be at this webinar. So he sends his regards. We are happy that we had a very successful session today, looking again at the Paris Agreement and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the Nexus aligning the climate, finance, and biodiversity to achieve the broader sustainable development goals agenda. We've listened to experts speak to us on a number of issues bordering on this subject matter. And we are happy that NCF and Natural Equity Capital are coming together to drive this series of webinars and discussions to make sure that everybody joins in this concerted global focus and effort towards combating these twin crises. And this step by these two organizations is, I think, is a one that is in order and a welcome development. We listened to so many things, from aligning climate finance with biodiversity to achieve the SDGs, to efforts that will help to elevate current levels of biodiversity finance and institutional mechanisms, and even to how to mobilize resources and all of that for climate financing. I think I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that every other person on this webinar will also learned quite a lot. So I wouldn't want to take us through everything that's been talked about, but I want to say on behalf of the DG that we are happy that this is happening, and these two organizations are leading this conversation on these very important topics. Like Dr. Iswa said, this is a series, and we're going to be having other series of this kind of webinar in the coming months. And it's interesting also that it is happening in the build up to the COP28 that is being planned and anticipated in the coming months. So let's all continue to lend our voice and act in a sustainable manner to help save our planet, our environment, which many experts have defined to be our life support system. I would want to end these remarks on a note of thanks. First, to all the participants who have joined us today and made this webinar a very participatory one and an interesting one. On behalf of the organizers, NCF and the Natural Eco Capital, I want to say a very big thank you to all the panelists, from Jeremy to Eddie to Omobolande to Male, and to all those who asked questions, made contributions. We say thank you for joining us. To all our partners, Natural Eco Capital, NCF, Capitals Coalition Hub, CEFI, Business for Nature, Access Corporation, Nature Squared, we say thank you for being a part of this and for all the support. And thank you to all those who played some critical role working from the behind the scene to make sure that we had a successful webinar. We hope that when we reach out to you again, you will join us and that all of us will continue working together to saving our planet and conserving our environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please, let's just put your, if you can, if you're in position, put your video on, we will take a photograph. Please, would you like to stop sharing, please? Stop sharing, let people put on their video, please. Please, all to do that so that we have a full, by the time we're building a, yeah, we need more to put on their video, please. Yeah, I think we're having, please, we encourage you to put it. Don't unmute yourself, just, it's really your photograph we want to see or your video. You can see the way we all look handsome and beautiful. So thank you very much for those who see their videos. Please mute yourself. Yeah, okay, great.
Eugene, can you see Professor Ekpere?
Yes, we can see you, sir.
Now very clearly. I can see you.
Thank you.
Ronti, I hope you are taking all the pictures. Yeah, now we can see everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. This has been a very good experience.
Thank you.